we know from Ben Roberts' defamation action that Andrew Hastie had complained about Ben Robert-Smith, and as had some other corporals at the SAS, because he got another award. He got the VC, and again, one of the strange things about that was apparently he wasn't at the top of the shortlist for the VC, but they put him up there, the staffers, because he was so good looking and because he gave good press reference. And they were like, oh, well, he'll be the one that we want to go to the Queen. We don't want some sort of bearded, angry looking guy who may have been braver, but just doesn't, you know, people will get a bit scared of. We don't want that. We're going to control the narrative. I'm going to have this good-looking guy who gives a good press conference. You'll notice that most of the big medal winners are good-looking people, and not everybody in the army is. And it makes you wonder whether that's why they're selected. When people are known that it's a good news story, the minister gets a boost for it, and but it's so destabilising for professional soldiers to think that it's been run in some sort of PR campaign way. And you don't get a medal even though you're brave because you're not good looking enough, or you don't look the part for the staffers. It's a terrible thing. Anyway, something very strange happened after those complaints were made, and the top brass thinks that they say, oh, we never heard the complaints against Robert Smith, and we never heard that. Now, I know, it just makes you wonder. And they've got drones over the top of the place, and a drone operator also complained and said every time I'm on top of Robert Smith's, at an objective, a place where he takes he takes prisoners. When he arrives, there are people alive, handcuffed, and then he tells me to take the drone away, and then the drone comes back, and the people are dead. And guess what happened? This is typical. The drone operator complained to a general, and the general told the drone operator to shut up, mind your own business, because they weren't going to upset the apple cart with their star player. And you could be the same thing happening. In my book, you'll see I reported some prisoner abuse. It wasn't the biggest thing in the world, but the interesting thing was that they told me to shut up. Well, what are you even doing? Don't even think about reporting bad news. Didn't you get the memo that we look the other way? Because it's a democracy. The minister only wants to hear good news. You only see good news back. So something happened at the end of 2012, and they changed the rules of engagement in a strange way. And I was there in Special Operations Command, and I said, why have you done this? Why have you suddenly made the rules of engagement impossible? And they also started threatening murder charges. And I looked into it and I said, this is my real first complaint, was when the rules of engagement changed. I said, this will get people killed. You've suddenly got 7 tests for someone in a firefight, and they've got to be, they had things like, it's got to be reasonable, it's got to be necessary, they've got to be directly participating in hostilities. It was just ridiculous to think that an SAS soldier with rounds going down could think of those things. And they also said you could be liable for murder. And I said, this is strange. I said, it was my job to sort of protect their interests. And so I was like, why have you made it so hard for them? And if someone gets killed trying to follow this, it'll be on your head. And wouldn't you'll be afraid if it comes out in the inquiry that an SAS soldier got killed because you weren't allowing him to defend himself, it's going to look bad for you. But what was interesting, another old friend from the military, what was interesting was they just fobbed my complaint off. And it wasn't even a complaint at that stage, but it was just a request for further information. And they said, oh, the Attorney General's Department have told us to do this. And I said, can you show me the advice, the legal advice that says that? And they armed and eventually they got it, and I got it, and it didn't say that at all. And so we started to see this it said your rules of engagement are too tight, and they're tighter than they need to be. And so the story didn't make sense. So I knew something was wrong at that point. And there were always allegations about what went on in 2012 when Ben Robinson was there, and there were kill count competitions, etc. And not just with him, but other people. Now, these were well known, and yet in 2000, they didn't investigate any of them. None of them were investigated at all. And in 2013, suddenly everyone was being investigated. But what was strange is that things were being investigated which clearly were just people having a normal fight with the Taliban. And on top of that, the media were being alerted. And so it looked like we were trying to say to the media, oh, look, we really care. We really care about war crimes. Look over here, don't look over there. And it was sophisticated, and this is one of the problems I've had to explain. It was these guys are not idiots. They work in secrets and lies and smoke and mirrors, and a bit like Robodebt. Robodebt's quite helpful for my case because it shows how a real government department works. Everybody's looking the other way. Everybody's signing off on it, and then they come to the Royal Commission and they go, oh, I didn't know. It wasn't my job to make sure it was legal. But we all know that they're all lying to get promoted and get up the chain or whatever. And everybody, the few people that say, yeah, sure, get shunted aside or ignored. And so just picture a department run by people like Catherine Campbell and lots of them. And they are smart people. And I believe what was happening because, and it was one particular, there was a case where someone cut off the hand of a dead Taliban in order to identify the fingerprints. And this was while this sounds like a terrible thing, it actually wasn't illegal. And Stephen Smith, the minister, came out because the ABC heard about it. The ABC made a big deal. Stephen Smith came out and said, "This is the worst thing that's ever happened, ever." Now this is now we know that there was at least 39 murders the year before, and most people who've been there would say that that's conservative. It would be double or triple that. They were the ones that got caught out. Sometimes there was 12 people or something. The Onion Farm, which is one of the worst things, where they shot some Taliban and then they thought there might be witnesses and they were standing around a tractor and they just shot them all. I mean, that's pretty fucking bad. Excuse my language, but I mean, so cutting the hand off a dead Taliban was not the worst thing that ever happened. And I suspected a rat that we were making smoke and mirrors for saying, oh, look at these terrible things and look how hot we are, so no one would actually look at the really big things. I kept questioning him, saying, this guy, and one actually happened in Afghanistan when I was there, that died, and then where a guy was just defending himself, and it was pretty clear, and the witnesses, and this guy was never even charged, but they tried to put him in jail for murder, and I was like, well, hang on, this is not even within our parameters of investigating. It doesn't meet the threshold for murder. And I knew what I was talking about. I was an expert in the field, 3 law degrees, and I knew. And they were like, oh no, this is what always happens. And the press were called as well. And I said, look, we've probably killed 700 people in circumstances like this. You haven't investigated one of them. They had one war crimes trial in 2011 when the army threw it out. And this was a really bad one. They killed 5 children. They clearly didn't know what they were doing. And it wasn't me that threw it out or anything like that. It was the military that threw it out. And the judge said, we don't know the Afghans a duty of care. Now that must have been wrong. That must have been wrong. Kill 5 children and too bad. I mean under that legal reasoning, you could bomb a whole village by mistake, and there'd be nothing from it. Oh, mistake, no duty to care, And I could see that was wrong, and it turned out, a journalist found out about it, that it was because, and you would get that sort of brigade that still exists today, that say, I don't want to see soldiers put on trial. We don't put our boys on trial. Now, they were trolling that trial, and because they had a fair bit of momentum on Twitter, the army undermined their own trial because they didn't want to lose votes. Isn't that the most disgusting thing? And I didn't find that out. A journalist from The Age, a guy called Tom Hyland, found that out and said the army are running their own campaign in order to undermine the trial that they're running. So they had a trial in order to sort of win the left wing over, and then they undermined it to win the right wing over. So that's the sort of sophisticated tactics that they used. And that, even though that came out, a journalist published that story, but people were like, oh, who cares, what does that mean? But I was paying attention. So, it's quite a good point, Greg. I complained because we weren't investigating things which clearly we now know were crimes, major crimes, and we were investigating a whole lot of things that weren't crimes. And no one was ever charged from all the things that I said, hang on, this doesn't meet the parameters. Why are you calling the press? Why are you trying to look like you care when there's clearly so many areas where you don't care? For example, Ben Roberts-Smith wasn't investigated at all. Never. He was just given more and more medals. And yet, some unheard of guy who clearly was in a fight for his life, they almost put him in jail for murder. Now, that's not right. And I stood up for that guy, not because any sort of worship of the SAS or anything, but because it wasn't right. You don't put innocent people in jail to cover up for guilty people. And when you're, people, criticise me, when you can't, I could see that the whole organisation was broken, but as a whistleblower, you can't say that. Well, you can, but you're not going to get very far. They're going to say, oh, well, we all know. I used to be lots of people say, oh, of course politicians are corrupt. If you're going to be a whistleblower, you have to find some particular thing that is wrong or have broken the rules. And that was the thing that I latched onto, to say, we are doing these investigations. We are doing sham investigations to railroad people to cover up for other things. Now, of course, my enemies, the prosecutors, say, oh, he was just kind of, protect the SAS or something like that. We never got to run my case because the judge said there's no exceptions. There are no exceptions for war crimes. There's no exception for pedophilia. There's no exceptions for, the chief of the Defence Force could be selling secrets to the Chinese. You're not allowed to tell anybody. Now, that seems to be wrong to me, but anyway, it made it the case so there wasn't any point talking to the jury at all, because it would just be a waste of time. And like a sexual assault trial, and the poor old victims in the sexual assault trial, if you want to run in front of the jury, the prosecution or the defence counsel in that case, but it would have been reverse roles in life. They get to trash your reputation as much, as they possibly can. The underwear you're wearing, the amount of boyfriends you've had, your phone messages, we've seen it, totally unfair, totally off topic. And I take my hat off to those people who've had to deal with it. And they would have done that to me. They already have successfully, I've already got haters to say, oh, well, he just, But my enemies have always been the leadership. I've always suspected that they were stage managing everything. As I said, they have made heroes that weren't heroes for their own benefit. They made villains who weren't villains for their own benefit. It shows you that the stranglehold bad people have on the narrative, when after $6 trillion, 41 Australian lives, and we just gave the thing back to the Taliban, and no one's lost their job. You know, I'm on trial. No one's lost their job. No one's been told, hang on, that's the war crime. That's a huge stuff up. It's damaged Australia's brand. And there were a whole lot of other documents, which in my case, which I'm still not allowed to talk about, but had nothing to do with the SAS, well, nothing to do with investigations anyway, which I believe showed the organisation was run on two things only, public appearance, false messaging, public appearance, and also keeping the Americans happy. The only reason we were in Afghanistan was to keep for the American alliance. And that was actually one of the CDFs actually made a slip up and said that. He said, we're not there to help the Afghans. We're not there for Afghan women and girls, even though he tried to say that later on. It's just quite disgusting. They were there to make the Americans happy. And the problem with that is it means as long as the Americans happy, you've achieved your goal. So it doesn't matter whether your soldiers are committing war crimes. It doesn't matter whether you don't achieve anything. And that, I think, is a very bad policy for this country. American alliance might be good in some ways, but we can't just keep doing things to make the Americans like us. You know, and these were all the things that I would have raised in the jury trial, but apparently it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter if, you know, if our whole country was being destroyed to, you know, to make the Americans like us. It's apparently there is no exceptions to talk. And one of the reasons why we took a stand on it, Jade, he's going to do a surprise attack, is that I want change in the country. And it won't make things better putting a few corporals on trial. That is not going to fix this country. Ideally, we'd have put a general, we'd put a minister. We need to ask hard questions at the top, not just at the bottom. Great to have trials, but I mean, look at people say I'm supporting Ben Roberts-Smith or something. Ben Roberts-Smith deserves to go to trial, and yet he hasn't. And yet he hasn't. I've gone to trial, and is he ever going to go to trial? He hasn't even been charged. So, for the government to say that somehow I was helping, I mean, I'm not capable of putting him on trial. The government is the only ones that can do that. And one of them, there's always wheels within wheels, and while the Mackenzie and Masters did a good job and a very brave job in showing the truth about him, there's a real missing piece in this story, because I haven't read the books yet, but one of the problems is that at no point, as far as I can work out, do they ever say that the leadership have something to do with this problem. They never say, oh, when they turned a single unarmed 12-year-old into a Afghan a Taliban militia force trying to outflank the position. He didn't write that. When the leadership wrote things like that, when they gave him a VC because he was so good looking, whatever, they created a problem, and someone needs to get their ass kicked about that. It's not just about him. He was used by the government as much as he used the government, and they're the sort of questions I want looked at. I believe all government departments are probably like defence, in that they don't do the job they're meant to do. Look at the ones from Robodebt. They're meant to be looking after giving out money to people who deserve it, and instead they were running some sort of cheap political campaign to bash doll bludgers, and everyone was in on it because it was a vote winner. And I think all the government departments are like that, in that they think, what is going to make my minister look good the next election? Therefore, he'll give me a pay rise. You've got the SES on 900 grand. They're not paid that kind of money because they're particularly good at servicing Australia. They're paid that kind of money because they know where the bodies are buried, and they know how to make the minister look good. And they do it. You know, the Catherine Campbells, they're all like, you know, there'd be 20 Catherine Campbells in the city. And yeah, at minimum. She's probably one of the better ones. And she was a major general as well, so it tells you the sort of person that you know, unfortunately, and that's what I'm attacking. That's what, it's those systemic issues, and I want, hopefully there'll be a groundswell. Hopefully if people read my book, they'll begin to understand it, that it was a systemic thing. Not, well, I don't know whether I'm going to be house arrest or jail, but that will hopefully make people say, we need change in this country. We need change. And we can't go on like this forever. Our taxpayer money, we know, you know, on the tax scene, all the huge multinationals in this country, as Michael West points out, they don't pay any tax at all. It's you and me subsidising the government, and the money that we subsidise the government is spent usually in a self-licking ice cream sort of way to get the government re-elected, to make sure it's just on PR, on window dressing, not on actually doing the job. Like, this is the central complaint I had. The Defence Force does not defend Australia anymore. The Defence Force defends the minister. And I think that's wrong. You know, I didn't sign up, I didn't swear. This is one of the tragedies of my case. They said, well, you swear in front of the flag on a Bible, and it's actually to the Queen, but you can imagine that generally, for most Australians, that we would mean that means you're swearing to give your life for Australia. The judge said it doesn't mean Australia, it means the minister. And that is pretty disgusting. I mean, isn't that disgusting? And you know who the minister works for? The Americans. And that is the sort of thing I want looked at, you know. You won't get it from the press, and that's one of the problems that I have. The press, and this is one of the problems of whistleblowers, it relies on getting, you know, press on side, and that's not necessarily guaranteed at all. Most of the press gallery really work for the government, and you know, they'll all know how much, you know, what kind of coffee Albo likes, how many sugars he's got in it, but they're never going to run an anti-government story. And that's when I saw the ABC. They would have said, oh yeah, we'll run a bad soldier story, but we won't run a bad government story. I mean, they get paid by the government, so you can use some of it, but that shows you we're in a bad way when we've got 4 media organisations. One's owned by Rupert Murdoch, one's run by Peter Costello, one is beholden to the government. I mean, that's not a healthy way to be. And you know, the only way that the truth gets out is with independent media and people trying to fight stuff. Anyway, that's a bit of a whinge, but it's what I will say, and it's not, but it is nice to verbalise it, to say, look, I feel good about myself. You know, I've never liked myself more. It is hard, and it's not about getting popularity. You know, you've got plenty of haters out there, and as you know, and but people who've got no, you know, people like you know, who just prop up the government line and just say, oh well, it's a few bad soldiers. I mean, I don't think that's good enough. I think it's not about the last war, it's about the next war, and we're in danger of going to a war over Taiwan to bring peace and democracy to Taiwan. Of course, that's just bullshit, because the Americans think China's a threat economically, and we will be straight in there. We now really have no Australian defence policy. We have an American defence policy. We are part of the American through Five Eyes, and that's why my case was so contentious. The Americans saw me as being an American in the sense, in the legal sense, in that they were present in my case. They weren't didn't show their face, but the Attorney General was working for the Americans, stopping any information, any reference to the Americans coming out. Now that's wrong. They should not be able to poke their nose in Australian court cases, and simply because they just don't want anyone to know that how far Australia is up their backside, and and yet they got away with it because there's been so many changes with the laws, and the Attorney General just has to. And it's not the Attorney General, it's not Dreyfus, it's the spooks under his umbrella who come to the courtroom and say you can't No one can see that document, even the judge. They said that, it's quite outrageous. The judge can't even see that document. And of course this judge said, okay. I won't even look, you know. And then one of our lawyers was quite funny. He said, look, Judge, I've been looking at this document for the last 4 years and you're more trustworthy than me, so I don't think it's such a big deal. But it's this state of fear, and it's the next war that I worry about. It's what's going to happen unless people like me stand up. I don't encourage anybody else to do it just yet, but saying that it was the right thing for me to do. I've got no doubt about it. The essence of this is just that you will not get popular support, or majority anyway. You will always have people trying to run you down. But the only sort of thing, you need to like yourself, and you know, and I do, and I think if you read that book, what will possibly save me is enough people to read the book. So don't just read the book, display it, tell people about it, give it to your relatives, particularly the ones you don't like. Give it to, you know, great Christmas is a great time, and leave it lying around. Because it's entertaining, it's not political, but I mean, in that entertainment about the truth, hopefully people will get some sense of the complex picture, because it is 5 minutes to midnight in Australia now. Now soon we're going to have a Ministry of Truth, if we don't already have it. We're not allowed to, they're going to be closing people down for saying things online they don't like. The media is generally controlled. I saw that. I was quite surprised myself, and I grew up I was very young, but the Watergate era, when a government was toppled by media. I don't think that would ever happen anymore. The media is so, we've had reverse evolution. The major media companies are so controlled through tax and donor that they wouldn't actually topple a government on principle, and that's a problem. And you see with situations like Ukraine and COVID, and there's now a blanket narrative, you know, and it's very hard to break that, and that's a problem. It seems relatively benign now. 5, 10, 15 years later, it might not be benign at all. And we think, you know, Trump and Biden are pretty mad. The US presidents in 20 years' time are going to be completely different, you know. They will be like that new Argentine president, you know. They will be nutcases, and they will be running this country, because we've been sold out by too many people for free lunch and submarines. Oh my God, they're going to save us. You know, and yet they've got away with it. They're going to get away with it. Albo came in, great promise, and he couldn't love submarines more than he loves South Sydney. You know, it's go figure. You know, Mark Dreyfus, the one who was going to be a whistleblower protector. You know, it's just, in fact, the disgusting, the day I was sentenced or convicted, he came out and said, "Oh, I'm going to do a new whistleblower policy," and you've always got to see between the lines, and it's no different from Christian Porter. And he said, "Oh, I won't charge journalists. No. Oh, well, I'll have to give permission to charge journalists." And as if that was some sort of, yeah, you can laugh, but most people don't get it. So, that's very big of him. But of course, that just makes a climate where journalists have to write what he likes. You know, and that's not a good system. That's a terrible system. And when Christian Porter did it, everyone was like, "Oh my God, you're a creep." And he did it particularly because he was hoping the ABC wouldn't run that story about him, and they did anyway. And now Dreyfus has said the same thing. "I'll protect you. Yeah, just as long as you say what I want you to say, you'll be fine." Now that's a problem, you know, that really is a problem. And anyway, I've talked enough. It's thirsty work. You guys probably want to have a beer. Whatever you do.
Where are you taking us?
I'll take you. If you buy the book, I'll buy you a beer. How's that? Free drinks in the, what is it, the public bar.
It's a circular economy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much for giving us your thoughts, particularly on what's been happening with you recently and with the country. And thanks to Jack for keeping us all entertained up the front.
Yeah.
So would you please put your hands together for David McGrath?
Yeah.
So we have piles of books here. There's some down at the counter. If you want David to sign them, just feel free to grab one and just pay on your way out. But we'll sit David sort of somewhere around here, and if you'd line up and get the book signed, that'd be great. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.